I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and behind me today we have, again, the Mustang Mach 1. Now you guys already went along with Tom to test this out on track, but in today's video we've actually spent a bunch more time with it on the road and again revisited it on the track to see how well it stacks up as an overall proposition, and that's what today's video is going to be about. Today we've had a go in the Mustang Mach 1 on the road, and we've even spent more time in it on the racetrack getting acquainted with how this car goes. But before we get to that, we've got to talk about how this car looks, because the Mach 1 package references heritage of the Mustang, the original Stang and the original Mach 1 package. In the front bumper here, you can see it's slightly changed and updated and quite different to the normal car when you compare them like for like. There's also a new set of 19-inch alloy wheels, and the overall effect is really strong. It looks great, especially in fighter jet grey finished with the orange appearance pack, which adds orange Brembo calipers. But as good as it looks on the outside, it's what's under the skin that has us really excited about this Mach 1, because Ford has really gone to town in changing this car to make it more track ready. Underneath, you've got stiffer subframes from the GT350 and the rear toe link from the GT500 in the US. You've also got an open-air induction kit, which should add even more bark to that V8. And then you've also got a retuned suspension system, so stiffer springs up front and then a lower ride height by about 5mm and retuned MagnaRide dampers. Not to mention extra cooling for the brakes, for the engine and for the transmission. And in today's video we're going to see if all those changes have made the Mustang a better car just on track, or whether it's also a better car on the road. But first we're going to jump inside the cabin and check out how the Mustang is aging. So jumping inside the Mach 1, and the interior, although a little bit retro chicy, actually comes together really rather well, as it does in the normal Mustang. But there are a couple of extra tasty touches that set this Mach 1 apart from the base GT, and that starts with these fantastic Recaro seats that I'm sitting in. Now they are a $3,000 option in Australia, but we haven't sat in a car today that doesn't have them, so I would assume that most cars are going to have them, and they're definitely worth it. They hug you a little bit better than the normal seats, and also they're nicely leather appointed, electrically adjustable for fore, aft, up and down, but then they have a manual backrest, but that's not such a big deal. They do lose the heating and cooling of the regular car though, and yeah, so definitely a bit more of a track oriented vehicle, but that's exactly what this car is. So what else have we got in here? This gear stick, which hints at something that's coming later, because it's the same as the one in the Bullet, and it is attached to a Tremec gearbox, a 6-speed manual. In this manual, obviously you can get a 10-speed auto, but the manual just feels so good in the hands, and yeah, it just really sets off this sort of quasi-retro vibe that the Mustang's got going on here. The steering wheel's nice, a little bit big and perhaps a little bit fat for my tastes, but you can let me know what you think in the comments section down below. And then you've got this nice set of digital dials ahead of you that give you all of the information you need. And they give you readouts for stuff like oil temperature and transmission oil temperature, which is something that was a scourge, especially of automatic Mustangs, but this car has fixed most of that with the excess coolers that they've stuck onto it to make it a better car for the racetrack. You've got a Ford Sync infotainment system here too, which runs via touchscreen with wired Apple CarPlay, and that's great. It works just as well as you need something like that too. The big problem though inside the Mustang is storage. You do have decent cup holders and this little flip-up cubby here between the seats, but there's not really anywhere to store your phone nicely. This tray ahead of the shifter is pretty small, and then the door pocket's pretty hard and scratchy, but it is a pretty small car, and so that's kind of to be expected. There are rear seats in the back too, but they're really only kid-sized, much like a Toyota 86. So despite this car's much larger overall proportions, it's not actually that much more practical. And finally, one last really nice detail. You've got your Mach 1 plaque, which is numbered to let you know which of the 700 Mustang Mach 1s you've got in Australia, which is a really nice touch. All right, let's quickly check out the boot of this Mustang before we take it out on the track and then on the road. So round to the rear end of the Mustang Mach 1, and it looks wicked. It's not exactly maybe to my tastes, it's very American, but I totally get it, and wow, it just has so much presence out on the road. It's amazing to follow this car. Great little taillight design, and you can tell this car apart because it doesn't have a Mustang badge or a Ford badge back here, just a Mach 1 set into some piano black. You can let me know what you think of the whole package in the comments section down below, and the Mustang has a party piece of actually being rather practical. Pop that boot open and you've got 408 litres of space in this fastback, and that's plenty. It's enough for a weekend away for the people you can fit in the car, so actually
although it looks like a fairly impractical coupe, the Mustang isn't too bad. You can even fold the seats down and in theory carry a bicycle. But anyway, enough about the boring stuff of this Mustang Mach 1. Let's get it out on the road and on the racetrack and see how it does. All right, we are out on track in the Mustang Mach 1 and we're going to talk about how it is out here, because this isn't usually the stomp ground of a Mustang, or at least it wasn't until this World Mustang debuted in 2015 and could actually go around corners. And in this Mach 1, we've got the ultimate track-going version of the Mustang in Australia. So how is it? Well, we're on our warm-up lap now of this tight and rather technical circuit just outside of Sydney here. It's Sydney Motorsport Park South Circuit, also called Amaroo. And while it's not the ideal Mustang track, it is a lot of fun in this car. Now we've just completed a little bit of a cruisy lap to get us started, and we're going to come past the start-finish line, and I'm going to talk you through a lap and how the changes done to this Mustang Mach 1 affect its drivability, because, hint, it's quite a lot better than the standard GT. All right, so we've come across the start-finish line, tip it into this high-speed corner, no brakes, and immediately you can feel that this car is better balanced and it reacts better to the driver's inputs. Now that's a lot down to the stiffer suspension and chassis components in this car. You've got stiffer springs at the front and you've got a retuned MagneRide damper setup, and it makes for a car that is just that little bit more faithful to drivers' inputs. You don't notice that extra 6 kilowatts so much, but the shorter gearing means that you can use more of the gears in this car, which is always fun when you've got a manual. The auto works rather well on track too, and as an added bonus, this thing goes sideways really faithfully, even with stability control on, but it's so faithful because of that extra stiffer connection between the subframe and the car. And yeah, while it may not be out and out as quick as something like a Lotus Elise or a more track-focused car, maybe like a Toyota Supra, as you can probably tell by the smile on my face, I'm not really too bothered about the fact that it might not be quite as quick as some of the other cars out there. I'm just having a good time, chucking it around, enjoying the front engine, rear drive balance of the Mustang. And yeah, I've got to say, Ford Australia have done a pretty good job. You can forget about not having that Torsen LSD. I don't think it would really make a difference to actually how it drives on the racetrack, because yeah, this thing's great fun. All right, now we come to the running costs of the Ford Mustang. Now, we've been smashing around a track for a couple of hours, so the fuel economy has suffered. We're not going to bother telling you that, but on our road drive loop, we managed to record 10.7 litres per 100 Ks, which is actually quite a lot better than the combined 13.9 litres per 100 claim that Ford makes for the Mustang. Over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $1,149 to comprehensively insure their Ford Mustang. Now, your premium will vary according to things that insurers take into account, such as driving history, where you garage the car, make and model of the car, and who drives the car, so every premium will vary. All right, back to driving the Mustang. So, what's the Mustang Mach 1 like out here, cruising around the track at more sane speeds? Well, we've also tested it on the road, as I said in the introduction, and unfortunately we weren't able to record any of that, so we're just driving around the racetrack here, South Circuit, at a little bit more of a sane pace than before. And the good news is that the changes they've made to the Mach 1 have not really compromised how good the Mustang is as a road car. I mean, it's not the most sharp tool in the shed, even on the track. On the road, it still leaves a little bit of softness, a little bit to be desired, but there's so much about this Mustang that is enjoyable that, yeah, it can really capture your heart. That 5-litre V8 develops an extra 6 kilowatts here in this guise thanks to an open air induction kit, which sounds fantastic, and the throttle response on this thing is just to die for. A naturally aspirated V8, wow, it's great. So power is at 345 kilowatts and torque is at 556 newton meters, and that's more than enough, at least for me. I couldn't see myself needing to get any extra power out of this car, at least for a little while. Maybe after I got used to it, I could stick a supercharger onto it. But the beauty of this Mustang is that there is just so much support in the aftermarket to do that. And that's what makes it a really interesting prospect, because you can take this, a good package already, and you can add stuff to it as your ownership process gets along, and it can be developed with you if you like, which I think is pretty cool. But that 5-litre V8 in this instance is hooked up to a fantastic 6-speed Tremec gearbox, which differs from the regular GT, and you can feel that. We backed-to-backed, Ford brought along a regular 5-litre GT, so we could back-to-back the two cars, and the difference is subtle, but you do notice it. It's just got a bit of a meatier shift to it, this Tremec. You can also get a 10-speed automatic, obviously, which on track, as I mentioned, isn't too bad. It can find a gear, but when you're out on the road, it does tend to hunt around a little bit, trying to find the right ratio, and it'll change gears on you mid-corner if you're not committed to the throttle, if you're sort of just cruising through, which kind of hurts the Mustang's big bruiser ability, and it doesn't really need 10 speeds to shine, at least in my book. It's got so much mid-range grunt from this V8 that you just really don't need all those gears, and the 6-speed manual, if you can drive it, suits it really well. The other great thing about the 6-speed manual now is that you get an automatic rev blip function. You can turn it on and off easily through the menus as well, so if you feel like doing it yourself, which I have been pretty much on the road because it's very involving, and why else would you buy a manual transmission car if you can do it? Do it. But on track, you can just concentrate on getting your braking markers just that little bit more accurate and really enjoying yourself and not overthinking it. So it's really nice for that. But it is pretty easy to blip the throttle on the downshifts when you need to, so yeah. And that brings me on to the drive modes. We've got a couple of different modes for this adjustable MagneRide suspension, which is available on the standard GT, but is optional. And this package is a little bit firmer in general, I'm told, than the GT. We didn't test the GT with MagneRide, but it works really great. There is a little bit of excess harshness, even in comfort mode out on the road, compared to something like a family sedan, but the Mustang's a Mustang. It's not a family sedan, so you really do put up with it. And the extra control afforded by this MagneRide setup is fantastic when compared to the regular 5-litre GTs on the road. It actually allows you to drive the car with a bit more commitment on the blacktop, as well as out here on the racetrack. So really, it's a win-win. Some bad points about the Mustang: that ride does rattle the cabin around a little bit. The materials don't feel particularly well screwed together, and it's a very loud car on coarse chip surfaces. So even though it is a big country bruiser, you do have to have discussions at an elevated volume with your counterpart in the car. But again, that's something you'll figure out pretty quickly on a test drive, and it's something that afflicts this car's rivals such as the Toyota Supra, and even much more expensive cars like the BMW M2 are afflicted by this. But they all have their own character, and the Mustang certainly has its own character. It feels brawny, fantastic, and laying into that V8 and hearing that noise as it pops and crackles, it's like having a sip of whiskey on a cold night. That's how warming this engine sound is. I think I'm getting affected by this car. It's, yeah. It's interesting. I never thought I was a Mustang guy, but driving one, I'm coming around to the idea of it. And then safety systems. So this Mustang was afflicted by a couple of things when it was launched, as you might be aware. It was said on the brochure that this car came with adaptive cruise control. In reality, it doesn't. It doesn't in the US either, and it doesn't come with audible rear parking sensors either. So it comes with stuff like AEB and lane keep assist, but not enough to see the Mustang get any more than 3 stars when it was crash tested back when it was launched in 2016, and that was one of the reasons it wasn't chosen as a cop car. So there's an interesting tidbit. So, what do we think of the Mustang Mach 1? Well, it's a really interesting package that is pretty at home on the track and is a really rather fun car to drive on the road. It doesn't sacrifice too much of the GT's manners, and the MagneRide dampers in comfort setting actually make it quite agreeable. But you can let me know in the comments section what you think of the Mach 1, and if you're going to be trying to find one of the 700 units that are coming to Australia. And while you're down there, leave me a comment. We'd also love it if you could hit subscribe, the bell icon, and as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.